Well, let's bring in Dylan Taylor. He's Chairman and CEO of Voyager Space Holdings, joining us from Denver this morning. And Dylan, a huge moment for Richard Branson here. What are your thoughts on the flight? And more broadly, what are some of the trends we're going to see emerge as the commercialization of suborbital space tourism starts to take shape?
Right. Well, remarkable day for the space and the space industry. And I think that the mega trend that I would just direct our thoughts to is space will be more tangible. If you ask an everyday citizen on the street, do you know an astronaut? The answer is typically going to be no, because there's so few. But we're going to mint more astronauts probably in the next 12 months than we have previously in the whole history of humanity. So I think it's really going to be more tangible, more of an everyday experience. People will know people have been to space. And as we open up access, I think it really will change our perspective on what it means to be human. I really do.
And some analysis shows, Dylan, that space tourism is going to be a $3 billion industry by 2030. But how do you bring the costs down to a point where such a short journey is going to be worthwhile for the masses, your everyday astronauts out there?
Right. Well, it's a great point. Keep in mind, there are several vehicles out there. You have the Virgin space plane, you have the Blue Origin rocket, but there are other vehicles like, for example, Space Perspective, which is the high altitude balloon, which is about half the price of the other mechanisms to get to the edge of space. So I anticipate not only competition between the providers driving prices down, but I think demand is also going to increase. And of course, as demand increases, we should get scale economies as well. But I do think we'll get at least a step function down in price over the next 2 to 3 years.
And that's going to bring me to my next question. You kind of just answered it there. Will there be lasting demand? What will fuel that kind of demand? Because as we just heard in that package, the whole journey is only something like an hour and you're in space, the edge of space, for only a few minutes.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think once you have once you've whetted the appetite, I think you saw it with Richard here today. I think you're on the ladder, so to speak. So I think all these different experiences will build on one another. Right now, there aren't great destinations in space. Of course, we only have the International Space Station. But over the next 5-7 years, we're going to be building more habitat in space. We'll ultimately have a presence on the moon. Of course, Elon's focused on Mars. So as we create destinations in space and unique experiences, I think we'll have repeat travelers. And I think travelers will not only do suborbital, but ultimately orbital, and then ultimately destinations in space. So I think it'll be more of an ecosystem than simply just a one-off experience.
Dylan, what Tailwind benefits do you see impacting us here on Earth? At the moment, it still takes about 18 hours to fly from New York to Singapore. At the same time, it probably takes, I think it's around 13 hours to get from Sydney to Los Angeles. I mean, can't the billionaires be fixing issues like this first?
Well, I think they're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, if Elon is successful with Starship, which of course is a totally different platform than the Virgin space plane, you could do point to point on Earth. And I know that's on the roadmap for SpaceX. And that would change the game completely. You could go Sydney to New York in a matter of 20 minutes on Starship. So I do think all these technologies build and reinforce on one another. Once you crack the code, so to speak, to get untethered from the gravity of our Earth, there's lots of different ways to utilize that technology. So I would say all these things are mutually reinforcing. And then, just final point I would make, we need inspiration in this world. And I think the global economy is fueled by innovation. It's fueled by STEM education. It's fueled by young folks looking at projects and being inspired by them. And I don't think it can be underestimated how inspiring space is. If you talk to anyone under the age of 30, they think space is the place to be.
Dylan, just before we let you go, what happens next here? Bezos is going to be taking flight soon. Are we going to see anything different to what we saw from the Branson flight?
Yeah, it's a slightly different experience. Of course, it's a rocket straight up with a capsule that detaches. They'll be a little bit higher, about 100 kilometers versus 80 kilometers above the Earth. They'll get a little bit more, as I understand it, a little bit more of a free fall. And then, of course, the capsule goes all the way down into the Texas desert, ultimately parachutes deploy, and then reverse rockets actually fire. So it'll be a little bit different. The telemetry and following it online will be a little bit different. But ultimately, these are the same or similar experiences where you're going to ultimately see the Earth from space and get that overview perspective, that overview effect, as they call it.